Some time ago, Blizzard made a survey asking the community what they would like to see in a future Classic Plus. But in this survey, Blizzard asked the most out-of-touch questions. Questions like, would you want flying mounts in Classic Vanilla? And this got some people really fired up. So the community took matters into their own hands. And in response, they made a real Classic Plus survey. Shout out to the guys at Countdown to Classic. So in today's video, I'll be going over the results of this survey while I give you guys my take on the questions asked. So let's dive into it and take a look at what the community actually want to see in a future Classic Plus. All right, so the first few questions here, they are a little bit arbitrary. So we'll just go through the first questions real fast until we get to the more juicy stuff. First off, are you currently subscribed? And the majority answers yes. Which version of WoW do you enjoy the most? And actually, I want to talk a little bit about this one. At the time of the survey, a lot of people were really hyped about Season of Discovery because the first few phases were actually quite good. I wouldn't expect, if we did this survey now, that many people would answer Season of Discovery. But a lot of people were enjoying Season of Discovery at the time of this survey. The other half answered Classic Era, and then you have 10% Master Lich King to TBC. And that's this question. Which class do you main? Server structure preference. Giant regional servers, many layers. That's what most people answered. Usually, and that's also been the case with private servers, people want one big server instead of multiple servers. One giant server has always been the most fun because at some point the population will dwindle, and then it's nice to play on a big server because then you can always find groups and just a lot of people running around and makes the server feel a lot more alive. There's always world PvP as well. So moving on to the next one. Should servers have forced faction population balance? And the majority says only for PvP servers. And then we have 8%, 9% that says no, and 25% says yes. And I do agree with this one here, mostly for PvP servers, because what's really the point in a PvE server? But then again, you could say who wants to, like, it kind of breaks the immersion if you have, even on a PvE server, only one faction, in my opinion. In the beginning of a server, I think it's a good idea to have this enforced faction balance. Should PvP servers allow players to roll both Horde and Alliance on the same account? A lot of the private servers, I mean, that I've been playing on before we got Classic, you were allowed to play Alliance and Horde on the same server. So I don't really see the big issue with this. I'd say yes to this one as well. Next one, would you like to see more playable races? And 60% votes yes to that, 20% votes no, and another 20% votes neutral. I know Turtle WoW, they have High Elves and Goblins for Horde, High Elves for Alliance. I wouldn't mind that either. I'm not sure I really like the theme of the Draenei, the Space Goats. So for me, it's a yes. Next one, would you like more race and class combinations? And the majority answers yes. Undead and human hunters, gnome priests, Tauren mage. Probably wouldn't want to see a Tauren mage. I think that kind of breaks the immersion. These are just probably examples, right? It could have been dwarf mage or undead hunters and stuff like that. So, and I think I agree with that. The next one, should shamans and paladins be on both factions? Now, this is a juicy one. The majority actually votes yes to that. And next up, 25.9% of people, they say no, but I like Sword's approach to Alliance Wind Fury, Horde Salvation trade-offs. And then we have 20% that vote no, and 18% that votes yes, as a future content patch / hero type class / unlockable class, etc. For me, I'd go with the majority here. I don't think I would like Tauren paladins on a Horde side, but I think thematically it makes a lot of sense to have undead paladins, because you have undead priests, and paladins were usually humans lore-wise, and why would they lose their ability to wield the light if undead priest can wield the light? So for me, lore-wise and immersion-wise, it makes a lot of sense to have undead paladins as well as dwarf shamans, because shamans are connected to the earth, much like dwarfs are. Lore-wise, I think those two would make the most sense in my opinion. In a perfect world, Blizzard would be able to balance paladins and shamans, but realistically, they're not going to do that. That'll always be a struggle for Blizzard. And therefore, I share this sentiment. I'd also vote yes, that shamans and paladins should be on both factions. Racials should, number one, have a high impact, should be niche but flavorful, be removed entirely, or be flexible between races with the possibility to learn each other race's abilities via a quest or something. And I think I'm with the majority here on this one, because 52.5% votes that it should be a niche. It should be flavorful, but it should be a niche use and not that impactful in either PvP or PvE. And once again, because it's really difficult to balance between races. And then we go on to character customization. Please select what you would like added. And the majority picks more hairstyles, beards, scars, tattoos, hair color options, skin tone, jewelry, eye color, etc. Only 9% or 10% says leave options as they are. And another half say that 48% say that they're neutral. They don't care either or. It doesn't hurt to have more options to customize your character. Should the barbershop be added? There are some really split opinions on this one, I can see. 32.5% votes yes, just for haircuts, beards, the basics. And then 14.7% votes everything, including skin tone, features, etc. And then the majority coming in at 33.7% votes yes, absolute character remake, but not race. And then 19% votes no, not at all. And I agree that I think you should be able to change sex and looks on your character via the barbershop. So long as you can't change your racials or your race or class for that matter. Not that you've ever been able to do that, but major things, just cosmetic things, I think is fine. Select which character associated services you would accept in a game shop. Name change, race change, faction change, server transfer, character boost, none of the above. And 26 votes, none of the above. Character boosts, 8.6. I don't get why people would want a character boost. The server transfer is the most upvoted. Then there's name change, then race change, and then faction change is the least, besides of course character boost. And then moving on to the next theme here, which is the leveling experience. What is the ideal leveling pace for 1 to 60 in a hypothetical Classic Plus? So the most upvoted with 27.1% says 120 hours, just like Classic 1.12 is. So the current Classic or Classic era, that's around 120 hours played to reach max level. And then second, with 24.1%, says 90 hours, which are equivalent to the TBC changes. And 19.5% votes for 40 hours, similar to Season of the Discovery pace with various experience buffs. And then 18.3% says 150 hours, made more thorough, assuming additional quests, etc. And then coming in at the last place, we have 11% voting for 60 hours, similar to Wrath of the Lich King with heirlooms equipped. And dear God, heirlooms. What a stupid concept in my opinion. I would never want to see heirlooms in a Classic Plus. Imagine going through the entire leveling experience not needing to change a single item. The whole idea of leveling up, in my opinion, is also upgrading your character, and you simply just remove that aspect of the game. So in my opinion, that doesn't make any sense. In my opinion, I don't think it should take longer to level up. So 150 hours is a bit excessive. I think the classic pace is quite slow, actually. So 120 hours, maybe reduce that a little bit, but do it in a smart way. I really like the way they did it in Turtle WoW, where you would rest under a tent and that would increase the speed at which you would gain rested experience. And they did something similar to that in Season of Discovery, which was a sleeping bag. And I actually like that concept, but I don't want to see flat experience gains. I don't want to see a buff in the corner of my screen saying, okay, you get this and this much more from questing out in the world or something like that. I do think that they should flush out questing areas and add additional quests. And I think they should reduce experience from dungeons slightly, because the meta right now is really just cleaving dungeons all the time. So instead of increasing quest experience, because that way you're gonna make grinding unviable. If you increase the quest experience too much, then you're actually limiting your options, because now grinding is not really a good option anymore. I like it to be close. I like it to be that questing is slightly faster than grinding, but grinding is very boring, but it's also a viable option. Why I have my entire grinding guide, leveling/grinding guide on my channel. I prefer grinding most of the levels, mainly because it earns me a lot of gold. So check out my grinding guide if you would like to see how that works. But overall, in my opinion, something close to the pace that we already have. I agree with the majority on this one. Just shift it a little bit in a sense that dungeons should give a little bit less experience, more quests should be added. So to make sure that there's not one option that is the best to do, there should be multiple equally good options for leveling so that you have more choices as a player. So that's just my take on this one. Next one, would you like additional quests added to Classic Plus? Yes, of course we would like that, and that's also what the majority votes. They say yes, but just a few to smooth out the thinner level brackets. Another says yes, many more quests. I want to play my favorite zones more, and that's 29.9%. And then 24% says quests on quests on quests, 1 to 60, one continent, multiple routes for 1 to 60. This one is actually a little bit split, and I think on this one, for the first time, I disagree with the majority. I wouldn't just want a few more quests to smooth out the thinner level brackets. I don't see any problem in having a lot more quests. I'd go with the yellow on this one, 29.9%. Yes, many more quests. I want to play my favorite zones more. I think that strikes a good balance between these options. And then next up, check the boxes you agree with about professions granting experience. First off, no XP should be given for professions at all. That's the majority that votes that by 44.6%. And then 18.7% votes that gathering should grant experience. 8.4% votes that crafting should grant experience, similar to orange, yellow, green mobs of your level. And then 39.8% votes both should grant experience. And once again, I agree with not the minority, but the second to that, the 39.8% that both should grant XP, but it shouldn't be as much, of course, as mobs, grinding mobs, or as questing or doing dungeons and so on. I think professions should grant XP. I like more options because this is also progressing your character. And actually, I want to add to this one, I also think that doing battlegrounds should grant some XP, not just turning in those tokens that you get, but also just participating. Of course, winning should give you more than losing, but losing should still give you some experience. And I should also think you should be able to disable experience, just totally disable it. If you don't want to gain any experience, you should be able to right-click on your icon and press disable experience. And they actually have done that on Turtle WoW. I don't think many people know about it or care for that matter, but if you are into twinking, it's just a lot easier to be able to just right-click your character, disable experience, and then you're safe at that level. Moving on to the next one. Would a feature like setting up camp as a portable in Season of Discovery sleeping bag be a good addition? Sleeping bag allows the player to unfurl a bag to sleep in, essentially creating a inn anywhere in the world with a 3-hour cooldown on use. And the majority answers yes by 50%. A 20% answers no, and 30% are neutral. And I think personally it's a fine idea. They did something similar on Turtle WoW as well. It's just a tent instead that you use the new profession, survival profession, to craft. And then you can set up tent, and anyone around you can just move into or under the tent and get some faster rested experience up to a cap. And once you reach this cap, you reach it a lot faster than you usually would. Then you move out again. So there's some social dynamic around it, because essentially you're incentivizing people to gather up at certain locations. So there's always Goldshire and Crossroads where these tents are up a lot of the time, and outside of the major cities as well. So it's a fun little gimmick that gives some experience boost without really being something it's not forced on you. You have to go out of your way to get it, which is also I think a good idea. And there's some social dynamic around it, and essentially I think it's a fine idea. All right, moving on to the next one. When should you purchase your first mount? Level 40, level 30, or level 20? And the majority answers level 40, 30% answers level 30, and 17% answers level 20. And again, I wouldn't want it at level 20. I think that overlaps a lot with many of the abilities you're getting. Aspect of the cheetah, you're getting a ghost wolf if you're a shaman, getting a lot of movement abilities at that level. So keep it at that. I think it's fine. Maybe at level 30, that could be an option to have a mount at level 30. Because that's when you move out to the bigger zones, and usually quest-wise, that's where distance really comes into play. Like you have to move from one area to a whole nother zone, maybe to just complete one quest, and it's really annoying if you have to run all that way. But again, they can mitigate that if they add more quests into existing zones and expand into different new zones, so maybe it's not going to be such a big issue. What is your preferred dungeon forming option? Bulletin board is an add-on currently used to list adverts and how long ago they posted, letting players bypass the spam of the chat window. Searching a keyword like Scholar will let you see everyone currently looking for group or looking for more Scholarmans specifically, and you can right-click and whisper them. Yes, that was a great feature, but they added actually in the anniversary, and I think, when was it? In TPC? Or was it in Wrath that they added the LFG tool where it didn't teleport you to the dungeon, which is I've always thought all the way back since Wrath of the Lich King came out, and they introduced the looking for group tool. What a shame that it teleported you to the dungeon, because that's really the issue with the add-on, or with the feature, is that it removes any chance for you to meet someone in the world outside of the major city. So people would just stand in a major city, sign up for a dungeon, get teleported to the dungeon, and once it's done, get teleported back into the major city. So the open world dies, essentially. Combine that with flying mounts, and then there's no world PvP. It's completely empty, and the world is barren and dead. Contrast that to vanilla, where the world is a lot more alive, because one, you don't have flying mounts, so you have to move on ground everywhere, so you bump into players constantly. And the other thing, you have to move to dungeons. So I don't want any tool to ruin that. And what they did on the anniversary is just took the bulletin board and made it into a feature in an LFG tool. And I think that's the best way to go. But let's see what people answer. 46% answers a LFG tool bulletin board, plus manual invites, plus summoning stones, right? Then we have 25% who answers LFG tool, manual invites, everyone travels to the distance. Yeah, I think I'm against summoning stones. What's going to happen here is maybe you just need 2 people to be at the instance, and then they'll be able to summon others. So the good thing about that is going to be convenience for a lot of people, and I can see the value in that. But the downside to that is now these 3 people who were otherwise going to have to travel to the dungeon and essentially creating open world PvP, those are now gone, and there's going to be less open world PvP because of that. So that's probably going to be, if you are going to a dungeon, you're not in the mindset, you don't want PvP, probably, maybe. But other people around you would like to gank you, would like to have the opportunity to PvP if you are on a PvP server. So there are pros and cons for a thing like this. I'm a little bit torn between this one. Let people have the opportunity to create organic world PvP. 10% answers message LFJ channel. Manual invites, everyone's travels to the instance. I don't agree with this. This is just a clusterfuck of messaging in the chat. That's what we've had up until now, and it could be done better for sure. LFG role queues, automatic forming and teleport in and out. Yes, that's what we had in Wrath of the Lich King, and definitely I think that's what ruined a lot of the world PvP and just experiencing the world of Warcraft. So definitely not this one. I think 8.8% of the people who answers are maybe semi-retarded. And then we have 10%, another 10% who answers NFG roll queues, automated forming plus summoning stones. So no teleporting, but automatic forming is what they want. And the problem with this is say you want a hunter pet to tank. That's never gonna happen with this setup. Actually, hunter pets are quite, but that's a video for another time. But some hunter pets like the carrion bird and the owl who have screech are actually quite strong tanks in the early levels, on par with warriors if not stronger. So that setup will never happen if you have automated forming of the groups, or a shaman tank, or some off composition if you want to assemble something. Let's say somebody advertises, well, I can tank for sure, I can tank, but he's not a dedicated tank. Then that wouldn't happen. So maybe if you want to form a group who doesn't have a healer because you don't feel like you need a dedicated healer, if just you have whatever your retribution or your enhancement shaman and you want him to off heal a little bit because, I don't know, you have a high level tank or something, then that also wouldn't happen. If he signed up as a DPS, then you wouldn't be able to have that communication with him and talk about, okay, can you just off heal a little bit and then we could go like this, and then you sit in a queue for a lot longer because of that. So I also don't like the automated forming. It also removes a lot of the social aspect, of course, but that's a given. All right, then moving on to which alt-friendly implementations are acceptable. And they propose attunements removed entirely, bind on account attunement items only, for example, bind on account reputation, enchants and recipes, heirloom items, God no, instant mail to your own account, none of the above. And this is how people voted. Of course, instant mail, which is already on the anniversary now. So you can mail your own account or mail to your own characters and receive the mail instantly. And a massive, 87% votes yes to that. Heirloom items and removing attunements entirely, those two has been the least voted, and I agree with that. And then we have bind on account attunement items, for example, Oni. I think, was it Season of Discovery that did this? And yeah, I think I like this. I think I like some amount of account-wide attunement, so you don't have to go through the entire Oni attunement on multiple characters, which is kind of tedious. It's especially on the Alliance side, but also on the Horde side, kind of long. So I think also I would vote on this one as well. Bind on account, reputation, enchants, and recipes. But that's enchants and recipes are fine, but as soon as you get to gear and stuff like that, that's a bit iffy. I wouldn't vote on that because that's going to be way too easy for you to just make an alt and gear it right away. I think that's going to be, maybe it's not, but for me, these are fine. Bind on account attunements and bind on account reputation. I'd say actually I'd go as far as saying pretty much all attunements, I would say would be fine to have account-wide, all raid attunements. And dungeon, if they ever release dungeon-specific attunements in the future, then I probably also wouldn't mind that. But that's my take. These are the way that people voted. Heirloom items, of course not. That's a whole, game-breaking thing that they added in Wrath of the Lich King, where you could buy these items at max level, send them to your alt, and already at level 1 you have your character equipped, and basically you're skipping the entire gearing process throughout, pretty much the entire leveling process on your alt characters, because they have these heirloom items. And yeah, entirely removing attunements. I think attunements are fun, and they are also a way of a barrier to entry. So I think it's fine to keep them. That's also what keeps the world alive in a way, especially if you in an attunement process make use of old dungeons. So how do you keep these old dungeons relevant? Well, you use them in attunements to raids. So maybe you've already progressed through most of the old dungeons, and then a new raid comes out. But in order to enter this raid, you have to go back into one of those or several of those older dungeons or questing zones and do something there. And that's gonna keep the world, but also the older dungeons more alive. And what they did in Season of Discovery to keep the old dungeons alive is also have these badges or coins you get whenever you kill a boss in a dungeon, and you can trade these in for lower tier gear. I don't like catch-up mechanics as far as in every time a new raid comes out, the old tier items automatically get added to this coin system so you can easily get access to it. I think that's the wrong way of doing catch-up. I think some catch-up is good. Too much catch-up is you're gonna feel like the effort is not being rewarded. It's a fine line. You want people to be able to catch up a little bit, but I wouldn't go too far on that. I wouldn't add tier gear, raid gear. I'd make sure that the old raids are relevant. Should we gain rested XP faster in Classic Plus? Yeah, a bit. I think here are the options. Vanilla rates are fine, 5% per 8 hours. And then yes, a bit more rested to come back each day would be nice. Yes, doubled it. Pandarian ratio. I couldn't even remember that's a thing, but it's apparently a thing in Mist of Pandaria, I'm guessing. Pandarian ratio will double the rested XP. I'd say yes, just like the majority here with the 42.3%. Yeah, just a little bit more. 5% per 8 hours. That's really not much, right? You'd need to stay out of the game for several days to just get even a little impact on your leveling. And nowadays, where people are chronically online, and this is what they did on Third One with the tents, basically as well, just like the sleeping bag in Season of Discovery and things was discussed before. You could also just do it this way. So maybe doubling it isn't as bad as it maybe sounds, because that's still 4 hours instead of 8 to just get 5%, right? Or 8 hours to get 10%. So it's not really that much. Now we're getting to our more juicy stuff: toolkits, spells, and talents. This is the real juicy stuff. So, classes in 1.12 vanilla have appropriately developed toolkits that promote engaging rotations and gameplay. And I need to add something to this, are actually quite balanced in PvP, which many people don't know or don't realize or don't want to realize. That I'd argue that vanilla is probably one of the few closest, I couldn't say expansions, because it's not an expansion, but it's a version of the game where PvP is actually quite balanced in terms of not specs, but from class to class. Go watch my PvP tier list video I made, where I cover how classes perform in a 1v1 scenario against each other. But let's go take a look at this. Who agrees with this? A lot of people disagree. And I think engaging rotations and gameplay, that's mostly rotations, is something for PvE, right? That's your raid rotation, and that's not really very engaging. That's mainly just mages and most other classes spamming 1 or 2 spells or abilities. So I can see why the majority disagrees. And then 25.8% are kind of neutral, maybe because it doesn't matter to them with the rotation. They don't care as much, which is I kind of agree with, but it's because most of my mindset is around PvP, and you never really use your entire toolkit in PvE. You only use your entire toolkit in PvP. That's where you need to use every spell. 20% or 19.8% agrees that they are engaging and the gameplay is good. I'd say these are 2 very different questions put into one question. So it's a kind of it's really hard to answer this one, right? Because I'd say they don't promote engaging rotations, but they are appropriate and well developed for gameplay in just an overall sense of the game. Though there are many things that they could improve. You're still sitting on many useless talents and many useless abilities. You know, I play Hunter, Rogue, Paladin, and Shaman, and I think the Shaman and the Hunter are probably the worst in terms of abilities, because really the Hunter sits on a lot of like Arcane Shot and Disengage and Distracting Shot and Scorpion Sting, which is just, those are really rarely used, if ever. And same for Shamans with their, what's it called, Wind Wall Totem, and there are many totems that are just sitting there, not really that useful, very niche uses, if any at all. So you could look into those and maybe change some things, make things a little bit more useful, or cut away some of all the bloat. But it seems like it's a very split. Like a lot of people disagree. They think that the rotations are bad and gameplay is not that appropriately developed. The other, a fourth of the player base say they're neutral. 20% agree, and 19% strongly disagree. So you could clump these 2 into one. You could clump these 2 into one. So how much is that? Let's just say that's 27%, and this is 46%, and then 25% is neutral. So a lot of people, they disagree with this statement. And I'd say when it comes to engaging rotations, I disagree, but I agree when it comes to overall gameplay, especially for PvP. Alright guys, that's it for this video. That's it for part 1. I had to break this video up into a series or else the video would be way too long. So once each episode is out, I'll put links to them in the description below of this video. So check out the description or a notification on screen now, and I'll see you in the next one.